Yep. You're still under oath. Go ahead, Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Lieutenant Ezzell.
Good afternoon.
My understanding is that as the supervising investigator, as the lieutenant, that the buck stops with you on this case. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you were supervising other investigators who worked on this case, obviously. That's right?
Yes.
And you assigned lead investigators over time. Is that right?
At the very beginning, I did, yes.
So were there multiple lead investigators as this case moved through the different years?
Counting myself, I believe there were 3.
Those 3 separate lead investigators?
Yes.
There was some testimony on direct. With respect to days that you calculated Mr. Redwine was present in town and that Dylan could have been with him, you recall that testimony, obviously?
Yes, based on the work schedule.
But there were other sources of information available to you, so you would agree with that, right? With respect to when Mr. Redwine was in town, at the same time Dylan was in town, to be specific.
Could you show me what you're talking about?
Sure. Permission to publish People's 480. Sure. So you calculated somewhere in the neighborhood, well, 93 days that Mark and Dylan, or at least that Mark was in town and could have been with Dylan in Durango, right?
I believe it was 94 days just based on the work schedule.
But you did not include in what you described for the jury the occasion on May 27, 2012, when Dylan was in town visiting his father, spending time with his father. Is that fair?
Objection, Judge. I think that mischaracterizes the evidence. Well, you can, Mr. Ezzell can, or Lieutenant Ezzell can correct him if he's wrong.
So your testimony did not include the fact that Mark and Dylan were together in Durango on May 27, 2012, right?
This refreshes my memory here. I did not recall this text.
So on this occasion, that was not included in your description of times when Dylan and Mark were together. We have proof that that is inaccurate. So the description of times worked and when Mr. Redwine was in town, at least on this score, is wrong. Would you agree?
Yes, at least on this score.
I could trouble counsel to go to page 6. This text exchange between Dylan and his father, Mark Redwine, demonstrates another occasion on which Dylan and Mark were in Durango and interacting with each other together. Would you agree?
It's my understanding from this that Dylan was in the Durango area, but not staying at Mark's house.
I could have counsel. So your testimony now is that Dylan and Mark weren't staying together at the time?
It's my understanding that Dylan was staying at a friend's house.
I could have counsel scroll to page 5. This would indicate that Mark is picking Dylan up, right?
Yes, but not at his house.
But you didn't include this as one of the occasions that Mark was in town and spending time with Dylan, right?
At his house.
No, that wasn't the testimony. It was times that Mr. Redwine was in town based on the record from Mr. Redwine's employer. Times when he was in town excluded this date, correct?
For the purpose that you're describing, yes.
And this was, in fact, an occasion Mr. Redwine was in town in Durango, right?
Yes.
I can have that taken down, thank you. Lieutenant Ezzell, as the supervising lieutenant on this case, you would agree that making compilations and summing things up, that it's critical to be accurate?
Yes.
If I could have counsel play that video that we discussed, it's People's Exhibit 360, the time on it. I forget what we talked about, maybe 2:40, 2:35. Anything before 2:45, then 10 seconds. It's fine. Can I have you start just a little bit forward? Well, this is fine. For the record, this is being started at 2:30. My understanding is that we're looking to the south.
Is that a question?
Yes. Lieutenant Ezzell, at this minute mark, are we looking to the south from Runlet Park?
Pretty much to the south, southeast.
Could begin this, please. And Your Honor, may I have permission to move about the way?
Yes, go ahead.
If I could have a pause here.
Take the microphone, please.
So this clearing that we're seeing here kind of extends as we'll spin more towards where you parked and loaded at the top of the image. That probably makes it terrible record. Anyway, are you following me?
Yes.
That this clearing is sort of separated by this Aspen Grove, and then there's another clearing. Headed towards the north.
And can you read what the time is on it?
Yes, 2:41. It's panning to the north, correct?
Yes, it is.
And my understanding of your testimony was that you're not finding animal bones in this area. Did I understand you correctly?
No.
All right, if you keep rotating. Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt.
You stop it for a second.
Yes, that answer and colloquy was unclear to me.
It was unclear to me too as to how he was answering though. So could you clarify that?
That's fine, and I think that we were a little bit too far to the south and east. At any rate, as we get this way,
Well,
it'll be more clear. So I can withdraw the last question.
all right, the jury can disregard the last answer then. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry. And it's at 2:46, if I got counted started again. Stop it here, thank you. So we're at the 2:minute 53-second mark, right? Is this the area you were describing that you're looking around in and not finding anything?
That is not. The area that I'm referring to is the immediate vicinity of where the skull was recovered.
So that's approximately right in here.
No.
Okay. Is it going to be at all on this video?
I'm sorry, is what going to be on the video?
The location of the skull?
Yes.
Okay. If you keep moving it. Oh, I'm sorry, stop again. So 2:54. Then you would agree that this area here is covered in animal bones.
I would not say covered, but there were animal bones up in Runlet Park, in the meadow, and up on the ridge and in the tree line up in there. But the area I'm referring to is the immediate vicinity of where the skull was located, which is approximately under the drone. There were no other bones in that immediate vicinity.
I see. And what radius were you describing around the skull?
Well, we went approximately 200 feet down below the skull and worked our way back up. Did not find any animal bones through that area.
So from the drone is positioned in this image directly down, is that right? From where the skull is, like it's above the GPS location?
It's generally above that location. I can't tell you if it's precisely over. The wind was blowing the drone around that day.
Okay. Fair to say, though, that an individual walking around from the road to this area would find all kinds of bones.
Again, the characterization of all kinds of bones is not something that I would say, but if you walk across that meadow from Middle Mountain Road, you will find animal bones scattered about, mostly cows. And once you get into the tree line where the skull was located, I found no bones except for the skull.
So in this area, you're finding cow bones. Did law enforcement ever determine what was eating those cows?
No.
I could have counsel take that down. I appreciate your queuing that for us. Thank you. And just to get real complicated here, I'm going to ask to publish Defense Exhibit 1893. July of 2016 and August of 2018. So there was obviously the occasion when you were there with the Fosters in 2015. Were there others?
Yes.
And how many people were involved?
The number of people varied depending on what our specific purpose or mission was on those given days. We had anywhere from 3 or 4 individuals to up to a dozen.
And so besides July of 2016 and August of 2018, when?
Don't recall the specific dates, but we went up into that area several times. I've been up into that area multiple times by myself. Back in June of 2013, when we did the search of Middle Mountain Road, we had search teams that started in the Runlet Park area.
I could have counsel go to 517, People's Exhibit 517. Permission to approach?
Yes.
Sir, if I understood your direct testimony, you acknowledge that this exhibit is an approximation, first of all, right?
Correct.
And that this isn't to suggest that there have been boots on the ground on every area that's marked here in this peach type color, right?
That's correct.
And if I understood your direct testimony properly, you described that this space in here was searched by helicopter. Is that right?
That area in there, portions of it were searched with boots on the ground, and portions were searched by helicopter.
There's an area below this that has not been marked. Is that all area that was searched by helicopter?
I couldn't say specifically if they flew into that drainage there. What I can tell you is that we had teams go down the cliff face on ropes.
Given that this is an approximation and it is not the sum of everything that's been searched, is it overbroad or underbroad?
My belief is that we could show some additional areas.
But the description on direct examination was that, and this has been repeated throughout the trial, that we have essentially impenetrable landscape. Would you agree that that's been testimony you've heard during the pendency of this trial?
I have heard that, and I have seen it.
Okay. So that you would agree with that testimony that what we're talking about here is so much deadfall, so cliffed out, that this is not a space that a human could traverse.
I think a determined human could traverse it, but it is full of cliffs and deadfalls, very rough ground.
So you still have not crossed the bridge and hiked the waterfall trail, have you?
If you're referring to the trail that's coming off of Black Bear Lane, it's my understanding that trail was not in existence as an improved trail in 2012.
My question was, you have still not walked that trail, have you?
I have not walked such a trail.
And you would agree with me that some of these areas were cleared by by helicopter?
Yes.
If I could have counsel go to Exhibit 362, and I'll be looking for the 15-second mark. Yes, sir. This is 62, I think. The screen reads site number 1, Redwine Home. There's an X marking Mr. Redwine's house. This is drone footage. The starting with a 05 second number. What we're doing is going straight at the cliff. Agreed?
Mostly straight at the cliffs, yes.
Had we gone south, there would not be, it wouldn't be as cliffed out as we see sort of center left in this image, right?
That's correct. There's not near the size of cliffs in that area if you turn further south.
And this waterfall that we keep talking about is because there is a stream that creates a watershed that would be less impenetrable than these cliffs going south, right?
I wouldn't say less impenetrable, but I would say less steep.
Less steep. Is that right?
Less steep than cliffs, yes.
Okay, you play. So we're stopping here at the 15-second mark. You agree that this drone is now taking a bit of the dog leg. We're moving to the left with the drone, right?
I can't tell you if that's an intentional move on his part or due to the wind at that level, but yes, the drone is actually making more of an angle towards the Site 2, which is the purpose of this video.
So the operator was not instructed to fly the drone at the cliff?
The operator was instructed to fly the drone towards Site 2, which is just beyond the cliffs.
Was there any discussion about taking the most direct route?
That is the most direct route. We're talking a straight line.
Right, okay. So that's what the drone operator was instructed to do?
Correct.
Is that a drone that you can program the GPS into?
I'm not familiar with the drone operator's equipment.
Okay. I can have that played here, please. Stop it here, please. So we're stopping here at about the 43-second mark. You would agree that to the south, so towards you in this image, that's a plateau would make it sound too flat, but it's not. It's not like this section that's on the left side of the sea. To the south, you could walk without significant elevation.
I can tell you that the difference in terrain from the location of Mark's residence, which is about 7,800 feet.
So but what I'm talking about here is, I think plateau is actually an appropriate term for what would be to the south. There would not be another cliff band to the south for at least a mile.
There's not another cliff band right through that area, but the elevation is still the same.
If I could just have you play it for a few more seconds. Thank you. So if I get to stop, thank you. At about 57 seconds, the drone that had gone to the left to take in those beautiful cliffs is now cutting from the north back to the south. Would you agree?
No, I would have to watch that again. I didn't see what you're talking about.
That's fine. I could keep playing. I think that's sufficient. Thank you. There was some description of how the drone operator had to relocate. That's because the drone operator started at Mr. Redwine's house. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I beg your pardon for jumping around a little bit here with this, but when we were looking at the Runlet Park area, the first images and video that was being displayed a moment ago, you had testified on direct about the two-track road. Do you recall testifying that that ran to the west of the Runlet Park area where the skull was found?
It starts basically in the north and runs to the west all the way down the mountain. It becomes a very broken trail until it reaches the area of Five Branches Camper Park at the north end of Vicito Lake.
Above the area where the skull was recovered towards the two-track road is steeper than it would be to come down from Runlet Park, or the road up there. Would you agree?
Yes.
So it's an easier route in from Runlet Park and Middle Mountain Road than it would be from that two-track. Would you agree?
Not necessarily. It would depend on where you're at on that two-track road.
You made some mention on direct about Mr. Redwine not participating in searches, but you're aware that he was organizing searches, right?
I'm aware that he attempted to, yes.
And he had an individual with a dog team that was willing to work with him. Her name's Wendy Kessinger.
Yes, Wendy Kessinger.
And in fact, law enforcement, the Plata County Sheriff's Office said, we'd rather you not, because Wendy Kessinger had fallen out of favor with the Sheriff's Office. Is that a fair characterization?
No.
Is it fair to say that at one point, law enforcement had been working with Wendy Kessinger and her dog?
We worked with Wendy Kessinger in December of 2012.
And at some point, law enforcement determined that Wendy Kessinger was not someone that would be used in further searches. Is that right?
We had reason to believe that she was not reliable.
And that information was conveyed to Mr. Redwine while he was planning his search with her offer to volunteer and help.
I'm not aware of that.
With respect to things that, and I mean, Lieutenant, I get that we're all just human, so you can't be aware of all of the things that are happening in an investigation, but you were aware that Corey Redwine had remarked that law enforcement asked him to stay out of the way. You're aware of that, right?
I heard him testify to that, yes.
But you were never able to identify the law enforcement official who you were ultimately supervising who conveyed that information to Corey Redwine, right?
At the time, I had no reason to do that because I didn't realize it had been done until he testified to that fact.
And in a similar vein, you've not been able to identify which law enforcement official told Mr. Redwine that, right?
I specifically asked that question of my investigators, and the response was in the negative. Nobody told him that.
There were lots of types of sheriff's office deputies and personnel working this case, agreed?
We had jail deputies, patrol deputies, and investigators.
And additionally, multiple agencies, correct?
We had several different agencies from this area and, excuse me, and from out of the area assisting us.
But suffice to say, at least amongst your crew of investigators, they didn't recall saying anything like, it would be best if you stayed out of our way.
My investigators and some patrolmen were the only personnel that had contact with Mark that I was aware of.
There was some testimony about the work at Mr. Redwine's house, and when Ron Armstrong was finished, provided, and then later a certificate of occupancy was provided. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
But you were also present when Ron Armstrong was testifying and saying that the house, the work was completed soon after he completed or got the authorization to proceed done in April of 2010, a full year before the certificate of occupancy, right?
Did he completed the work in April of 2010?
Well, he said it just took him a couple of months after he had an authorization to proceed, and that would have meant that his work was complete sometime in 2010.
Mr. Champagne?
Objection, Judge. I think that mischaracterizes the testimony of Mr. Armstrong.
Well, you know, there's been so much testimony, I personally don't remember, so I can't rule on that, but I think that's up to the jury to remember. We've made your point, and they'll remember what Mr. Armstrong stated in their collective memories. Go ahead.
The basis or the day that you used to start the possible days Dylan could have been at Mr. Redwine's house was in July of 2011, though, right? When you come up with this calculation of 94 days.
I believe it was starting from April 22nd of 2011.
But it was that certificate of occupancy. That's why you started it there.
Correct.
On June 26, 2013, you were in the area where the femur, tibia, clavicle of Dylan has been found. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You were with an ICE agent, Investigators Gabbard, Dyer, and someone by the name of Hutchins. Does that sound right?
I was with multiple people. We had a large search party.
And on that day, you were part of discovering the bones of a cow, right?
Yes, over behind the gravel pit.
The bones were strewn about, fair?
Yes.
And it wasn't the full skeletal remains, right?
I don't believe it was. They were quite dry and sun-bleached. Looked like they had been there for an extended period of time.
Did you ever find the rancher who was missing that cow?
Did not look for a rancher who's missing a cow.
Or how about the ear tag of that dead cow?
Did not look for an ear tag of a dead cow.
Did you find any ear tags of any of the dead cattle that are up between Remain Site 1 and Remain Site 2?
Did not see any ear tags of any cattle up there.
On the day that you went to Remain Site 2, you were with Lee Foster looking for the skull. This would have been November 2nd, 2015. Does that orient you?
Okay.
You searched the area for 4.5 hours, is that right?
That sounds accurate, yes.
And then you were certain you were in the right location based on what you were being told?
Towards the end of the search, yes.
And on that day, you found 2 long bones, is that right?
I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Refresh your recollection to take a look at the report.
Sure.
Commissioner Approach.
Yes.
Page 5994.
Okay.
Fair to say that you located 2 long bones that were documented with photos and GPS?
We did, but that was not at the site where the skull was located.
It was that day when you arrived in the search area at Runlet Peak with Leah, right?
Correct, and I can show you the entire area we searched if you'd like.
You write well, in the sentence where you're talking about the long bones, we were certain that we were in the correct area.
Hold on. Your objection?
He doesn't get to just simply read the report into the record. That's
Right.
not how this works.
I think that's right.
Okay. At the time that the long bones were found, were you certain that we were in the correct area based on the description Leah provided?
Based on the description that Leah provided and the area that she led us into, we were certain that we were in the right search area.
And in that search area, located 2 long bones documented with photos and GPS, right, sir?
Well below the site of the skull.
One of the things that you looked into in 2016 was to contact Colorado State Patrol about DUI contacts in the Vallecito area.
Objection.
Right?
Is this relevant objection?
Relevance beyond the scope.
We had a long talk at the bench about how this scope was created by Mr. Champagne's questioning.
All right. And you're gonna have to come up then. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Ezzell, in getting work records for Mr. Redwine, you also learned that vehicles he drove for his employer had GPS units, right?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
That's well within the scope of.
It goes into the extent of the investigation. I'm gonna let
That's fair to say, right? There were GPS devices on the vehicles Mr. Redwine was driving to the locations in the exhibit that was admitted on direct examination. Fair?
Yes, I was aware of that through other investigators.
And similarly, at least this has to do with United Pipeline, you're aware that Mr. Redwine, on the morning of November 19th, drove the Chevy to United Pipeline, right?
The white Chevy, yes, his personal vehicle.
And to your knowledge, was any transfer evidence found in that Chevy?
We're so far beyond the scope. I'm not even.
That's beyond the scope.
Yeah. What's wrong? The exhibit provided to the jury, number 361, has images of bones that were in fact recovered, right?
Could you remind me which?
361, sir. I have a copy if that's not sitting handy. It's got a skeleton on it with red.
Yes.
And that demonstrates bones that were recovered, correct?
Throughout the searches, yes.
And it demonstrates, it shows the earbuds, is that right?
Yes.
And a GPS location was taken at the time those earbuds were recovered, is that right?
Yes.
Same thing with the hair that is on this People's Exhibit 361, GPS coordinates were identified.
It's my understanding they took a single GPS reading for that site between the two deadfalls.
Sir, do you have that GPS reading in front of you?
I do not.
I take it you do not recollect the 12-number location of those items.
That would be correct.
If I showed you a document that Mr. Heidel and I believe yourself helped create, would that refresh your recollection?
I don't know that would help me remember what the numbers were, but it would tell me what the numbers were.
I'm going to object, Judge. I think this is cumulative. It's beyond the scope. 401, 403. It's not really relevant to anything.
But it would help if I understood what you were doing, Mr. Moran. I don't understand where you're going with this.
Judge, the location and items to include earbud and hair were admitted on an exhibit. There was another item located at the precise GPS location that was not included in what's been provided to the jury, and we intend to do so. I want this investigator to confirm that when they created a document that was the data for Google Earth exhibits provided to the jury, that data was correct, and it's missing one item, which is at the precise GPS location of items described and the data points that are at the
If
GPS.
it's already in, it's already in. I don't think you need to go any further with this witness. If you're going to introduce it to another one, that's great in terms of what you think is missing. Were you going to ask this witness what was missing? I mean, you also,
At some point, it may be this witness.
Okay, well, you can do it in your case in chief if you need to.
Permission to approach.
Why? I thought
I'm sorry, to approach the witness. I want to provide him an exhibit to see if he can identify it.
all right. And what exhibit is this? Okay, and it's previously been admitted? Okay.
Sir, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Was this a document that you helped create?
Yes.
Was this document created to demonstrate what the as precise as you could make it, locations of items of evidence where they were recovered and their description?
Yes, based on the information I had.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of a document that you created and you used or was used by the prosecution to create a Google Earth image that's been provided to this jury?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that the GPS or location description for the earbuds is north 37? So this is item 209, if you're following at home.
Yes, I'm with you.
All right, earbuds, Patterson, GPS location is north 3728.798, west 10731.876. You agree with me that that's the same number
Yes.
on your document?
Yes.
Then I'm going to ask to admit this piece of evidence.
Mr. Champagne?
Judge, although I think that was probably improper, I'm not going to object just to save time and keep things moving forward.
All right, it's admitted.
So to reorient you, the remains depicted on 361 obviously do not include a spine, right?
Correct.
A spine was never found.
No human spine was ever found.
And other parts of the child that would be in contact with, for instance, a backpack, were also not recovered, right?
Could you rephrase that?
Sure. For instance, the left clavicle or other parts of the child's upper body were not recovered as far as you know, correct?
To my knowledge, everything that was recovered is depicted on this chart.
Thank you. But you believe that it is not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area of Middle Mountain to Runlet Park. Agreed?
It's a very large area, very large mountain.
So you agree with the statement that it is not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area, correct?
And I'm going to object. It certainly requires speculation.
I don't think so. You can answer the question.
I suppose there could be other things up there that we are just unable to find for any number of reasons.
And you would agree that you have specifically testified to the statement, not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area, speaking about Middle Mountain, right?
Specifically what I just answered.
Thank you. That's all I have. And I appreciate your patience. It was to comply with court order.
Redirect?
Thank you, Judge. You searched that mountain over and over and over again, didn't you?
Objection leading,
It's all right.
vague.
No, it's not.
that a fair description?
Yes, I put a lot of individual and group miles on foot in many places over the mountain.
You were looking specifically for things like the phone, the backpack, other items related to Dylan.
Correct.
Did you ever find any?
No.
Counsel asked you why you didn't ever hike on the waterfall trail. Could you clarify that answer for me?
Yes, it's not a trail that I was personally aware of, and to my knowledge, that trail was not in existence as an improved trail of any kind in 2012.
If I may, I'm going to object to the witness providing information that's beyond his knowledge,
Well,
which is the second part of the answer.
you already got it out. That's already in front of the jury anyway. So you're overruled. That was an answer that he gave to your question on cross. Go ahead, Mr. Champagne.
Sorry, complete your answer, investigator Ezzell.
That is my answer.
Okay. That the trail did not exist in 2012-13?
To my understanding, yes.
But you did search the Vallecito Trail that goes north directly from Mark Redwine's home.
Yes, that was searched. ATV trails in the area were searched.
And you specifically referred to searching the area of the cliffs and below the cliffs, is that correct?
Correct.
And how was that done? You said something about ropes?
Yes, we had personnel on top of the cliffs. We had personnel rappelling down the cliffs, and we had personnel on the ground underneath the cliffs on foot.
I want to be clear with you back to the beginning of the cross-examination when we were talking about the number of days that Mark Redwine's work schedule showed that he was in Colorado. Counsel told you or asked you that it was critical to be accurate on that, correct?
Yes,
And when you were testifying during direct, were you testifying to his work days, known work days in the state of Colorado?
just work days according to what the schedule showed.
And that was 94 out of 577?
Correct.
And you only know that Dylan Redwine was in Colorado, but I believe you've heard testimony that he was here for the Memorial Day trip. Is that right?
Correct.
And counsel asked you about, I think asked you about the Labor Day trip. You know about those, right?
Yes.
Are you aware of any other times that Dylan Redwine was staying at the Vallecito house specifically?
I'm not specifically aware of any other times that he would have been at the house.
No further questions.
Any questions from the jury? Okay, counsel. All right, Lieutenant Ezzell. There were GPS tracking devices mentioned about being placed on Mr. Redwine's vehicle. Does that mean the two trucks, it says he owns, but I think one was, well, you can clarify. The two trucks involved anyway. Let me read this over just a second. The two trucks he owns had tracking devices since he used them for work travel. Do you understand the question? Because I'm not sure I read it very well.
No, I do not.
Okay. So were tracking devices placed on both trucks, if you know?
Yes.
Was one of those his work truck,
No.
just his personal trucks?
Just his personal trucks. His work truck was at the office, and that's where it remained.
Okay. And if that doesn't answer the question, you can send another question down. So any follow-up on that?
If I may.
Yes.
Are you aware of the date range in which those GPS trackers were placed on his personal vehicles?
At one time, I was aware. I can't recall the date range now.
Okay. Would it be fair to say it was within the first few days or first few weeks of the investigation?
Yes, first few weeks, maybe a month or two.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did those trackers produce anything of evidentiary value in the case?
They did not.
No further questions.
Anything, Mr. Moran?
To be specific about that, did not have evidence of Mr. Redwine driving up and down Middle Mountain Road, depositing things at Remain Site 1 and Remain Site 2, correct?
Wouldn't be able to address the depositing things portion of the question. However, given the location and the type of equipment that was used, the variables on error distances was quite large.
So the answer is no, you did not have any of that evidence derived from the GPS systems that your agency installed, correct?
Correct. When he was up above in that area, I couldn't tell you if the GPS location was putting him right at his house or further away from his house.
Did not have GPS location information to put him at Runlet Park, right?
I think that's the best answer I can give you, what I just did.
Okay. So between, the question mentioned